Nazino tragedy, also known as the Nazino Island Massacre, stands as a chilling testament to the horrors of the Soviet Union during the 20th century. This horrifying event unfolded in May 1933, a time when Joseph Stalin's iron grip on the Soviet Union was tightening, and the country was reeling from the effects of widespread famine, purges, and forced collectivization. At the center of this dark episode was Nazino Island, a remote and desolate location situated on the Oby River in what is now Tomsk Oblast, Russia. It was here that approximately 6,700 prisoners, referred to as deportees, were sent with a sinister agenda. They were tasked with constructing a special settlement on the island and cultivating the land, but little did they know the nightmarish fate that awaited them. The deportees were abandoned on Nazino Island with only meager supplies to sustain them. Their provisions were shockingly inadequate, a scant amount of flour for sustenance, minimal tools, and virtually no clothing or shelter to protect them from the brutal Siberian climate. From the outset, it was clear that the Soviet authorities had condemned these individuals to a fate of unimaginable suffering. Conditions on the island deteriorated at an alarming rate. Widespread disease, violence, and even acts of cannibalism became horrifyingly commonplace. Within a mere 13 weeks, over 4,000 deportees had either perished or vanished, leaving most survivors in profound physical and psychological distress. The deportees who attempted to escape the island were met with ruthless armed guards, who showed no mercy. The situation was dire, and the world beyond the island offered little hope for those trapped in this living nightmare. The initial account of the Nazino tragedy was recorded by Vasily Velichko, a Soviet propaganda worker, but it remained hidden from the world for decades. The report was kept classified and shielded from public scrutiny by the oppressive Soviet regime. It wasn't until 1988, during the era of Glasnost, that the human rights organization Memorial conducted an investigation, finally bringing to light the horrors that had transpired 5 decades earlier. The true extent of the tragedy became widely known in 2002 when reports from a special commission, established by the Communist Party in September 1933, were made public. This revelation shocked the world, shedding light on the inhumane actions perpetrated by the Soviet regime. The roots of the Nazino tragedy can be traced back to the ambitious plan proposed by Genrikh Yagoda and Matvei Berman, the heads of the Soviet Secret Police, OGPU, and the Gulag labor camp system, respectively. Their proposal, presented to Joseph Stalin himself, aimed to resettle up to 2 million people in Siberia and the Kazakh Autonomous Socialist Soviet Republic. These individuals were meant to transform vast, untamed territories into productive regions within a short time frame. However, this plan faced severe challenges. The Soviet Union was grappling with a devastating famine, resources were limited, and the logistics of such a massive resettlement operation were daunting. Despite these challenges, the plan was approved, albeit with a reduced target of 1 million deportees. The selection of deportees was far from precise. Instead of targeting specific groups, many individuals from major cities like Moscow and Leningrad found themselves caught up in the deportation process simply because they lacked internal passports. The Soviet authorities' passportization campaign, initiated to cleanse major cities of undesirable elements, led to the arrest and deportation of thousands of people within a matter of months. The deportees were herded into Tomsk, Omsk, and Achinsk transit camps. The conditions in these camps were far from humane, and overcrowding exacerbated the already dire situation. Tomsk, in particular, struggled to cope with the influx of deportees, viewing them as both desperate and potentially contagious. The journey to Nazino Island was chaotic and poorly planned. Deportees were loaded onto river barges, ill-equipped for the task, and the initial disarray set the tone for the horrors to come. The lack of proper organization and provisioning during the journey foreshadowed the impending catastrophe. Upon arrival on Nazino Island, the deportees were greeted with snow, freezing temperatures, and a complete lack of shelter. Their initial ration of food was meager and chaotic, leading to violence and disorder. Dysentery soon spread among the deportees, as they resorted to mixing flour with river water in a desperate attempt to sustain themselves. Escape attempts were futile for many. Makeshift rafts, cobbled together in a desperate bid for freedom, often ended in tragedy, with corpses washing up on the island's shores. Guards, who were initially inexperienced and ill-equipped for this assignment, hunted down escapees as if they were mere prey. The situation continued to deteriorate. Gangs formed, terrorizing weaker settlers and committing violent acts over food and valuables. Even the guards, who were supposed to maintain order, engaged in extortion and violence. As desperation mounted, the unthinkable became a grim reality: cannibalism. Starving deportees resorted to murdering others for sustenance. Reports documented the horrifying instances of cannibalism that occurred on the island, as survival instincts overcame any vestige of morality. The Soviet authorities finally dissolved the settlement on Nazino Island in early June, transferring the surviving deportees to smaller settlements upstream on the Nazino River. However, many more perished during this process, and those who survived found themselves in dire straits, lacking proper tools and food, and facing an outbreak of typhus. Most refused to work in the new settlements, given their harrowing experiences on Nazino Island. In the aftermath, new settlements were established with non-deportee labor, but only a fraction of Nazino survivors were transferred to these locations. The death toll from the tragedy was staggering. Between 1,500 and 2,000 deportees perished from starvation, exposure, disease, murder, or accidental death. An additional 2,000 deportees disappeared and were presumed dead, accounting for those who died or vanished during transportation to or from the island. The report on the Nazino Island tragedy, initially sent to Joseph Stalin by Velichko, circulated among members of the Politburo and was eventually archived in Novosibirsk. The report revealed that a mere fraction of the approximately 6,700 deportees who arrived on the island in May 1933 survived. The commission established by the Communist Party estimated that, by October, only about 200 to 300 of the roughly 2,000 survivors were physically capable of working. Local officials and guards who attempted to dispute Velichko's report were instead reprimanded and, in some cases, sentenced to prison. The events on Nazino Island exposed fundamental issues with Soviet colonization projects. The Soviet leadership began to question the feasibility and ethics of such endeavors. In 1933 alone, nearly 368,000 special resettles were unaccounted for, with many dismissed or disappearing from their settlements. The Nazino incident marked the end of large-scale settlement plans in the Soviet Union, particularly those involving deportees from urban backgrounds and criminal histories. The horrors of Nazino Island remained hidden from the public eye for decades. After initial investigations in late 1933, the events were suppressed, known only to a handful of survivors, and the government,